Good day. This week's discussion will be on Louis Armstrong. Louis Armstrong is widely regarded as one of the most influential figures in the history of jazz. His work pushed the boundaries of the New Orleans jazz idiom, which was rooted in collective ensemble playing, and elevated jazz to a soloist driven art form. Today, we will examine how Armstrong's timeless performances in Heebie Jeebies, West End Blues, and Lazy River demonstrate his groundbreaking approach to both playing and singing. We will also compare his innovations to the new traditional New Orleans ensemble style exemplified in Dippermouth Blues, and we will consider his progression as an artist by analyzing one of his Hot Five recordings, Hotter Than That. Small administrative note, at the bottom of certain slides are links to the music we will be discussing. Feel free to click on them and expand your music repertoire. So sit back, relax, and let's dive right in. Heebie Jeebies, 1926. It was the birth of scat singing and innovations in vocal style. Heebie Jeebies is often celebrated as the first recording to popularize scat singing. According to legend, Armstrong began scatting during a session because his sheet music had fallen to the floor. But this happy accident became a defining moment in jazz history. Armstrong treats his voice as an instrument, crafting melodic, rhythmic, and improvisational lines that mirror the freedom of his trumpet playing. His playful, swinging phrasing breaks from the structured ensemble-based vocals typical of New Orleans jazz at the time. Armstrong's music on the Hot Five recordings of Heebie Jeebies encompasses all of the individuality that he viewed as quintessential to jazz and his music-making approach. Not only is Heebie Jeebies a revolutionary piece in and of itself, but much of it is contemporary response and related analytical material focuses exclusively on either Armstrong's scat vocals performances or the quintet's landmark instrumental arrangement. Indeed, the song is unique in both respects. Early jazz music was also almost exclusively vocal, and what instrumental music existed often served as an entertainment in traveling acts, parade music, or basic early dance bands. Trumpet and even cornet singing were employed as early attractions in the early styles of New Orleans, Chicago, and revival Dixieland, also white dancing bands of the 1920s. Singing into one's trumpet, while not as widespread in practice as it was in New Orleans jazz, was not Armstrong's invention, but the singer regarded it as one of his personal improvisational trademarks. Vocal limitations employed in live performances of Heebie Jeebies, in particular, saw Armstrong go so far in performance as to clench and sway a razor with a firm object, sometimes employing a handkerchief in the other hand, to invoke the sensually apparent feelings of his performance. So, what was this impact on jazz? Scat singing established a new avenue for vocal improvisation, paving the way for future jazz vocalists as Ella Fitzgerald, Sarah Vaughan, and even more recently Dave Matthews of the Dave Matthews Band, who uses scat lyrics frequently in his live performances. The recording showcases Armstrong's charisma and humor, making jazz more accessible and enjoyable for a broader audience. He sets himself apart from other jazz musicians through his unique timbre and range due to the wider than average front teeth, spit glasnost, bent in half valued notes, which made him sound like a trumpet or an instrument in and of itself. His groundbreaking scat singing, which was improvised and not composed, avoided using the same scat phrases again and again, adding more interest to his performances. His voice appeals to listeners because of its compelling qualities, and its timbre has a great effect on the auditory cognition that other vocal techniques have used. So West End Blues, published in 1928, is a masterpiece of virtuosity. West End Blues is widely regarded as one of the Armstrong's most iconic performances, encapsulating his technical mastery and emotional depth. From the opening cadenza, the unaccompanied trumpet introduction is a tour de force, blending a dazzling virtuosity, rhythmic complexity, and his expressive phrasing. It immediately establishes Armstrong's role as the soloist rather than just a member of the ensemble. Unlike the perfectly blended collective improvisations of Dipper Mouth Blues, which we will discuss later, West End Blues places Armstrong's trumpet at the center of the performance, with the ensemble serving as a backdrop. Armstrong's singing mirrors the lyrical quality of his trumpet playing, emphasizing phrasing, tone, and emotional nuance. His vocal solo adds a human and conversational dimension to the piece. So why is it considered a classic? The recording elevates in jazz to an early art form, demonstrating that it can be both technically sophisticated and deeply expressive. Armstrong's performance inspired generations of musicians and solidified his reputation as a genius. An important aspect of West End blues is the interplay and interaction between Armstrong as soloist and the ensemble. The musicians respond and listen to one another while performing. The concept of collective improvisation, in which soloists alternate taking the lead in soloing, is a fundamental characteristic of jazz. Jazz is a music that is intended to be played, which brings a direct human element to that music. It is an indication that jazz is characterized by the participants when they have personnel changes. When the leader is also a soloist, he performs two roles: the leader of the performance and the co-operator of the sound production. In West End Blues, by being the first and last to perform, Armstrong has created the tension and release for each episode. His scat improvisations in the last chorus act as a release, featuring a buoyant sequential series of phrases that heighten the light blues inflection of the preceding entry to the repose. The tension and tautness, the imagination daring dissonance and danger, embodying Charleston's hot, even surreal sense of amusement, evaporate into a grave ceremonial rest that Armstrong makes his own. This is how his performance not only translates the duality inherent in super improvised productions, but also brings to the surface an underlying antithesis between the one, the producer, and the many, the co-producers. Lazy River, 1931. Expanding the lyricism in jazz vocals. In Lazy River, Armstrong's vocal maturity shines as it transforms the song into a personal, emotive statement. Armstrong uses relaxed phrasing in this tune. He employs behind the beat phrasing and melodic establishments to create a sense of ease and intimacy. His ability to bend notes and stretch rhythm blurs the line between singing and instrumental improvisation. So again, why is this song classic? Lazy River demonstrates Armstrong's unparalleled skill as an interpreter, tuning a simple melody into a deeply moving performance. Lazy River is one of the many compositions that has its origin in American popular song tradition. The song begins with an instrumental exposition and a small drum introduction to give the content a clear feeling of rhythm. This groove is especially stimulated by the steady beat of the bass drum. Due to rhythmic variations introduced by the bass drum pattern, a rising shared rhythm pattern is created between the bass, the drums, and of course the brass instruments. This amplified bass figure does not undermine the shared set of beat notes between the horn players, but reinforces their backbeat accents. By accentuating the pulse of just once and letting the arm rest afterwards, the rhythm is restored, and the bass can keep its steady pulse beat. The rest of the drums and the bass players, as an accompaniment group, then repeat these patterns. So let's dive into Dipper Mouth Blues, which was released in 1923, as a comparison. To appreciate Armstrong's innovations, it's important to understand their traditional New Orleans jazz style, exemplified by King Oliver Creole's jazz band in Dipper Mouth Blues. The use of collective improvisation was key for Armstrong to invoke his lyrical genius. The performance relies on tightly woven ensemble interplay, with no single musician dominating the spotlight. Armstrong's cornet playing fits seamlessly into the group, contributing to the overall texture rather than standing out as a solo voice. In contrast, Armstrong created a shift in his lyrical style by later recordings prioritizing the soloist, with the ensemble serving to complement and frame his individual artistry. Dippermouth Blues was a very different song for Louis Armstrong, and it showed his lyrical mastery. So let's look at Hotter Than That. 1927 released, it's part of the Hot 5 recordings. Hotter Than That is a perfect example of Armstrong's progression as both a musician and a band leader. Armstrong's trumpet solos are bold, intricate, and full of swing, displaying his growing confidence and creativity. His scat singing in this piece is more refined than it was in Heebie-Jeebies, demonstrating his increased mastery of vocal improvisation and his growing as a musician. The call and response section with Lonnie Johnson on guitar showcases Armstrong's ability to interact dynamically with other musicians that are in the band, all the while maintaining his dominance as the focal point. So Armstrong's overall progression. Across these recordings, we have seen that Armstrong's artistic evolution from ensemble player to soloist. In Dippermouth Blues, Armstrong's role is supportive, but by West End Blues and beyond, he commands the spotlight as both a player and a singer. Armstrong blurs the line between his trumpet playing and singing, using both to express melody, rhythm, and emotion with equal mastery. His ability to innovate within and beyond the New Orleans jazz tradition sets the standard for future jazz soloists and vocalists, making his work timeless. Armstrong's sound, his concept, and most importantly his rhythm were developed to an extent not yet present in jazz up to that moment. Though the extent of his transformation may never be fully known, recreating some of those newly minted forms of expression is possible. In hindsight, we can see how Armstrong's expression of 4.5 measures could be filled with enough conversational fluidity and personal sentiment that could distill the essence of a mood, a sentiment, an essence of the music itself in a time span. For a musician's perspective, Armstrong was influential because he introduced many innovations in solo playing that greatly influenced the evolution of jazz solo improvisation for future generations. In his recording, Armstrong uses extreme discontinuity to create a feeling of movement and novelty in his solo. This recording is the peak of Armstrong's breaking principles of the trade, his improvisation, when nearly every phrase he plays is a little surge of energy followed by a long gap of silence and then another surge. Rather than lining up the beats for a solo neatly, timing out what can be comfortably played and then moving on, Armstrong interferes with bewilderingly long, breathless pauses into his breaks. In the chorus, fragments are caught in mid-leap, so that while his silences are overlong, his solos have a tendency to stop, not start. At the crux of his sixth chorus, Armstrong can be heard singing a break of several seconds as his band begins to wrap up the previous solo. Armstrong time and again defies metrical exposition by landing on places not suitable to be comfortable but aesthetically pleasing to the ear. Thank you for watching my video report. Here is my bibliography. Thank you for your time, and may God bless your day.